Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the the Public Service Commission of South Carolina's hearing in docket number 2020-125E, Dominion Energy South Carolina's application for adjustment of rates. It is 3:21, and we're going to go for about an hour or so, depending on where we are with the witness. We're going to close or take a break from testimony in the hearing of the case, the evidentiary hearing, and prepare for the public hearing this evening that starts at 6 p.m. We have approximately 60 public witnesses, ratepayers and such, signed up, and we're scheduled to go through 11:35 p.m. Depending on how things go, technical difficulties, trying to call back, folks who are having difficulty calling in. We may be here till about 12:30, 1 o'clock. Hopefully not, but just want to be prepared for that mentally. So with all that in mind, I hope that we can move forward expeditiously while not rushing anyone's case. We just definitely want to make sure we use our time in the most appropriate manner. Now, it's my understanding that ORS may have some preliminary matters they would like to discuss before we move forward with the next witness.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. In that vein, Mr. Willoughby and I were able to speak during the lunch break, and I believe it's my understanding that the company, ORS, and the other intervenors which are participating in this hearing are comfortable stipulating into the record the testimonies of one company witness, Witness Long, and two ORS witnesses, Witnesses Sandinato and Brazino. Of course, it's at the discretion of the commission, and if the commission is amenable, ORS would be happy to submit verifications of its two witnesses. Mr. Willoughby also proposed to stipulate into the record the testimonies of four other witnesses, Witness Woolridge, Witness Zhu, Witness Rothschild, and Witness Elbert. I wanted to let the commission know that Mr. Willoughby made this proposal about 3 o'clock, and I have sent that to the other intervenors, and the stipulations of the testimonies of those witnesses is currently being evaluated, but there is no consensus on that as of yet. So the three witnesses that we have, I believe, agreed to, should the commission be amenable, would be company witness Long and two ORS witnesses, ORS witness Brazino and ORS witness Sandinato. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We'll take those offers to stipulate to those witnesses' testimony under consideration, and hopefully get back to you no later than tomorrow, maybe Monday, just to make sure that's what the commission wants to do. Thank you for working on that. We appreciate the civility and the ability to work together for efficiency's sake. All right.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mitch Willoughby on behalf of the company. I would report that Ms. Elbert, depending upon, I think our next witness is Mr. Whiteley, but following Ms. Whiteley, we were planning to call Ms. Regina Elbert, and then following Ms. Regina Elbert would be Zachary Long. That's our order of witnesses that we now have planned. So for these two witnesses, and again, I don't know how long Mr. Whiteley would be, but perhaps it would be something that the commission, after Mr. Whiteley testifies, could consider whether they wish to accept the stipulation as far as Ms. Elbert is concerned and Mr. Long is concerned, to avoid hearing their testimony live.
So I want to make sure I understood you correctly. Attorney Willoughby, is witness Elbert also offered her testimony is being stipulated to by all the parties as well?
Well, no, we've offered Ms. Albert to stipulate her testimony, and as Andrew just reported, he's consulting with the other parties. They're on the line now. Maybe they could respond. We've all agreed to Zachary Long, so his testimony is stipulated or will be stipulated. But, Mr. Chairman, that is subject to the commission agreeing that they wish to do it in that fashion, that you wish to, because if we stipulate it into the record, then the commissioners themselves would not have the witness available to them to ask questions.
Right, that's exactly right.
So that would be the only issue that would need to be determined. But the agreement is that Mr. Long and then two witnesses for ORS that are not projected to be called this afternoon. The only reason I spoke up was because you had indicated that you may let us know either tomorrow or Monday, and so that may be we may get to them before then.
Understood. Well, let's proceed with your next witness and see where we end once we finish with that witness.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ziegler is presenting our next witness.
Mr. Chairman, this is Commissioner Thomas.
Commissioner Thomas?
Do we need to do a roll call?
We definitely need to do a roll call. Thank you for reminding me.
No problem.
We'll start with District 1, Commissioner Williams.
Participating virtually.
Vice Chair Belzer.
Present in the hearing room.
Commissioner Caston.
Present in the hearing room.
Commissioner Urban.
Present virtually.
Commissioner Powers.
Present virtually.
Commissioner Thomas.
Present virtually.
And Chairman Williams is present in the hearing room. Mr. Ziegler, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The company would call to the stand Mr. David Whiteley. And let me mention, as we informed the commission some time ago and the parties, Mr. Whiteley is going to be unavailable tomorrow morning. I believe we can finish his testimony between now and the end of the day, as the chairman has laid out. But if not, we might have to conclude his cross-examination on Monday, or maybe some other time if we aren't able to conclude. Mr. Whiteley is available to be sworn in.
Mr. Whiteley, if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much.
Please state your name for the record.
David Whiteley.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Whiteley BPS Planning Ventures. That's the consulting firm that I own.
Mr. Whiteley, did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 24 pages of rebuttal testimony that was filed with the commission in this proceeding?
I did.
Do you have any changes or additions to that testimony?
No, I do not.
If I ask you all the questions contained in your pre-filed rebuttal testimony here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I would move the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Whiteley be entered into the record of this proceeding as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Whiteley will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Whiteley, have you prepared a summary of that rebuttal testimony?
I have.
Would you please present that summary to the commission and the parties?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Williams and members of the commission. Let me tell you a little about myself because I have not testified before this commission in the past.
I'm sorry,
Whiteley
Mr. Whiteley, I'm sorry to interrupt. My court reporter is telling me that you have an exhibit. Attorney Ziegler, did you not want
Your
to?
Honor. I would move that exhibit DAW1 into the record. I was going to do that when he concluded, but we'll do it now.
Okay. Exhibit DAW1 would be entered into the record as hearing exhibit number 25.
Mr. Whiteley, please resume your rebuttal, your summary of your rebuttal testimony.
No, thank you. I started Whiteley BPS Planning Ventures in 2009 as a consulting firm focusing on transmission planning, operations, and management in the utility industry after being employed by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC. While I was at NERC, I led the development of transmission planning standards, including obtaining industry and Federal Energy Regulatory Commission approval of new and modified standards, as well as other areas. I left NERC to start my consulting business and take on the role of Executive Director of the Eastern Interconnection Planning Collaborative from 2009 to 2018, after having helped lead the development of that organization. The mission of EITC is to engage in collaborative activities that will enhance utility transmission planning and coordination among the planning coordinators in the eastern portion of North America. While I have not previously testified before this commission, I have testified on several occasions before the Missouri Public Service Commission, Illinois Commerce Commission, and the FERC when employed at Ameren, where I was Senior Vice President for Energy Delivery Services. I have also testified before FERC and the U.S. House of Representatives Subcommittee on Emerging Threats, Cybersecurity, Science and Technology under the Committee on Homeland Security in my role as Executive Vice President of NERC. My testimony addresses my review of the planning, development, and use of transmission upgrade projects that were undertaken to reinforce the DESC transmission system in anticipation of the completion of 2 new nuclear generating plants, and to provide an opinion on the value of those projects to customers. It also highlights several deficiencies in the testimony provided by South Carolina Energy Users Committee and South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs witness Edward G. McGavran III on the same subjects. The overarching result of my review is that the new facilities benefit current DESC customers and will benefit future customers with or without the addition of nuclear generation at BC Summer. I also conclude that the facilities were installed at a reasonable cost, making the overall project a good deal for DESC customers. My testimony explains that the planning done by DESC was based on solid and sound engineering practices. They applied industry-recognized standards, and the work conforms to NERC standards. In particular, I found that the initial planning of the transmission upgrade projects, as described by company witness Wade Richards in the merger docket, and the studies showing the need for those facilities was done using appropriate and accepted planning processes to determine the present and future needs on the DESC system. The planning studies performed meet or exceed industry standards in the way they were conducted, and they provided results that are similar to what would be expected in other locations on the transmission system in North America for similar situations. Furthermore, these studies applied consistent and generally accepted planning standards that meet NERC requirements and DESC's specific needs. Those planning processes and results have been audited by the Southeastern Electric Reliability Council as part of the NERC compliance process, and they have been found to be fully compliant with NERC requirements. I found that the new transmission facilities are used and useful today and are providing benefits to current DESC customers and will continue to provide benefits into the future. In fact, the transmission upgrade projects have substantially improved the performance of DESC's transmission system. My experience from working at NERC confirms that the DESC transmission system would be in serious violation of NERC standards without them. The goal of the transmission planning process is to find the best solutions for an uncertain future, given many variables in the analysis and very long lead times for building new and upgraded facilities that are solutions to any problems that are uncovered. That is what DESC has done, find the best solution. The transmission upgrade projects were planned as the best solution not only for the delivery of new nuclear generation, but also for the solution to other long-term system needs. They are consistent with the geographic distribution of load centers and generation centers on DESC system, all while building flexibility to address possible changes that might occur in the future. Just one example of this thoughtful planning is the new 230 kV transmission lines that provide a significant north-south pathway, allowing new generation sources to be located anywhere along that path, while at the same time providing loading relief to lower voltage 115 kV facilities. The transmission upgrade projects are part of a comprehensive upgrade to major components of the DESC transmission system to allow it to meet customers' needs reliably and effectively going forward. They are not just a means to connect the new generation. They are not just generation lead lines. The new 230 kV transmission lines connect into multiple locations and, along with the other elements of the overall project, they address multiple existing and anticipated shortcomings of the system. In particular, they address the need for additional north-south system reinforcement and loading relief for the 115 kV system that has previously carried much of the flow of power from north to south. As such, the transmission upgrade facilities have become an integral part of the DESC transmission system. They are not simply used and useful, but they are essential to the usefulness of DESC's transmission system in serving customers today and its compliance with mandatory NERC and FERC reliability standards and regulations. In the context of building significant north-south pathway, DESC has deployed facilities that are fully consistent with the size and needs of its system. DESC did not oversize the facilities in any way. The transmission lines of any voltage basically come in building block sizes. This is true for all utility systems. DESC chose the appropriately sized building blocks for its facilities and limited those facilities to 230 kV, which is appropriate. Based on my experience with solving problems of a magnitude similar to those of the DESC system, customers are getting a good deal today by utilizing the building block sizes chosen by DESC and constructing the transmission upgrade projects as a comprehensive integrated program. The criticism that the transmission lines are excessively large compared to their current use is without factual basis. The current and future expected loading on the new 230 kV transmission assets is reasonable and in line with what would be expected on systems across North America. My testimony provides additional analysis and perspectives on the responses to data requests from the Office of Regulatory Staff. From those data requests, ORS and others concluded that the percentage loading on the lines is low, but it is not low. To show this, I asked DESC's planning staff to compile data on transmission loading for transmission facilities across the eastern portion of the United States and just for the southeastern portion of the country. The data collected is presented in detail in my testimony and shows that typical 230 kV facilities in the southeast are loaded to between about 18% and 22% at peak. The 230 kV transmission lines included in the transmission upgrade facilities are currently loaded at peak in a range between 20% and 26% based on the testimony of Mr. Seaman Wynn. From this, I believe it's reasonable to conclude that the DESC transmission facilities in question are being utilized in a similar manner and at similar loading levels to other facilities on the transmission system. The DESC system has been built to a reasonable capacity and not overbuilt. I also reviewed the cost of the new facilities and compared it to the cost of similar facilities on utility systems across the country. I found that the DESC 230 kV double circuit transmission lines were constructed at a cost of about $1.4 million per mile. When I compared this to cost estimates for similar transmission lines used in a recent study sponsored by the U.S. Department of Energy and conducted by the EIPC, where I was the project manager, I found that the DESC costs were lower than the typical cost for 230 kV construction of about $1.8 million per mile for double circuit construction. This makes sense when looking at how the company went about completing the project in an integrated manner as described by company witness Mr. Kassam. I also reviewed the testimony filed by South Carolina Energy Users Witness Edward G. McGavran III on the subjects I just discussed and found several deficiencies. These deficiencies can be summarized by incorrectly presenting the results of studies done by Wade Richards, failing to recognize the long lead times required to build new transmission lines, ignoring the fact that the transmission system would be inadequate without the new facilities, and claiming that the new facilities are not needed until 2028. First, the studies completed by Wade Richards show that major violations of NERC standards and reliability deficiencies would exist today on the DESC system if the transmission upgrade facilities were not in place. This is true today and not just in future years. These studies were done using the same criteria and processes I described above. They used appropriate and accepted planning processes to determine the present and future transmission needs on DESC system. They applied consistent and generally accepted planning standards that meet NERC requirements and DESC specific needs. They meet or exceed industry standards in the way they were conducted, and they provided results that are similar to what would be expected in other locations on the transmission system in North America for similar situations. Good utility practice and NERC reliability standards mandate that utilities use reasonable processes to identify long-term reliability problems and mandate that action be taken to address those problems before they become actual operating issues. These standards do not allow utilities to ignore future reliability deficits. Mr. McGavran incorrectly underestimates these requirements. From my review of the studies, it is clear that without the transmission upgrade projects in place, DESC's transmission system would be deemed inadequate today. It would be flagged as violating multiple NERC standards. It would be open to extremely large penalties for poor transmission planning and system operation. In my experience, I've never seen any other system in North America with the level of inadequacies that would be present today if the transmission upgrade facilities had not been constructed. That result alone makes it clear the facilities are used and useful. Let me reiterate, there is no other system that I've seen in North America that has had the level of deficiencies that the DESC system would have today if the transmission upgrade facilities were not in place. Without those upgrades, the system would be in serious violation of NERC standards, requiring a major program of investments and construction to bring it into compliance with mandatory federal requirements. My experience working at NERC clearly indicates that major fines and penalties could be expected. Second, Mr. McGavran doesn't recognize the long lead times required for building new transmission facilities. He reaches a conclusion as if there are only 2 points in time. The first point in time is when the Commission approved the project, and then the second and only other point under consideration is when the decision was made to cancel the new generating units. The implication in Mr. McGavran's testimony is that DESC should have known the generation units would be canceled when construction of the transmission projects was underway in 2012, and therefore should have stopped them. Or alternatively, that DESC should have waited to build the facilities until after the generating units were completed. This is unrealistic. It either assumes prior knowledge that the units would be canceled, which is contrary to everyone's thinking at the time, or that DESC should have waited to start construction, making it impossible to have the required facilities in service when the generating units would have been completed. I found that DESC appropriately planned and built the needed facilities, considering the long lead times for new transmission construction. Third, Mr. McGavran makes statements that the costs exceed the benefits, while focusing only on secondary benefits, while ignoring the key fact that the transmission system would be inadequate without the new facilities. The testimony of Mr. Richards, which does provide actual study results that are reasonable and undisputed, show that the system would be inadequate without the transmission upgrade projects. Mr. McGavran incorrectly states that CERC and NERC standards would not require transmission expansion, quote, of this magnitude, but he doesn't acknowledge the magnitude of the transmission system inadequacies without the transmission upgrade facilities. And more specifically, Mr. McGavran provides no evidence that any other alternative transmission development comprised of fewer or lower capacity facilities would make it adequate. Finally, Mr. McGavran incorrectly refers to the upgrades as not being needed until 2028. The analysis that Mr. Richards presents was conducted using transmission study models for a number of years from 2018 through 2028, simulating both summer and winter conditions. And in each of these years, there are inadequacies identified. This demonstrates that the need for additional transmission facilities goes back to at least 2018, and that need continues throughout the 10-year period. Mr. McGavran gives no credit for the fact that during the 10-year period and beyond, the new facilities are adding direct value for customers because the need for additional facility upgrades has been eliminated or deferred because the strength of the system has been markedly improved. Taking all this into consideration, in my professional opinion, the planning upon which need was determined was sound. The facilities built are used and useful today as part of an overall comprehensive plan to enhance the reliability and resiliency of the DESC transmission system. These facilities are appropriately sized, their cost is reasonable, and with those costs being below what I would have expected on similar systems in the United States, DESC customers are benefiting today and will continue to benefit in the future. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Whiteley is available for cross-examination and questions from the commissioners.
AARP.
Adam Prothero for AARP. We have no questions of this witness. Thank you.
Walmart.
Stephanie Eden for Walmart. We have no questions for this witness.
Sierra Club.
Dorothy Jaffe for Sierra Club. We have no questions. Thank you.
United States Department of Defense and all other federal executive agencies.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Emily Medlin, no questions.
Frank Knapp, Jr.
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kate Mixon for States and CCL. We have no questions.
South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs.
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have just a few relatively brief questions. Good afternoon, Mr. Whiteley. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you. Are you well?
I am. Thank you. Mr. Whiteley, I'm going to first ask you to read a couple of sections from your testimony. If you don't mind turning to page 19, lines 10 through 13. I'll give you just 1 second to get there.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Page 19, what were the line numbers again, please?
Beginning on line 10.
Beginning on line 10, yes.
Okay, with the sentence beginning, the transmission upgrade projects and ending with in the future, if you don't mind reading that sentence, please.
The transmission upgrade projects were planned as the best solution not only for the delivery of new nuclear generation, but also for the solution to other long-term system needs, all while building flexibility to address changes in the future.
Thank you. And could you all, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wondered if I read far enough.
Yes, sir. That's perfect. Thank you so much. And if you could also, beginning on page 24, line 3, let me get there as well. The sentence beginning with, or kind of it's in the middle of the sentence, so if you prefer to read the entire sentence, it begins on line 2. But I'd ask you to read, they were also down to the end of the sentence, ending with corridor.
Although they would have accommodated new generation resources at VC Summer, they were also planned to be an integral part of the DESC transmission system and reinforce the transmission system's north-south corridor.
Thank you. So, Mr. Whiteley, I'm correct, am I not, that your testimony indicates that SCNG, or now Dominion Energy South Carolina, constructed these transmission lines not only for electricity that would have flowed from BC Summer Units 2 and 3, but that in their construction they were also planned for other purposes, correct?
Well, they would have been planned as part of a comprehensive study of the transmission system. So when you do that, you put the new facilities into the system models and you test them. And that means they're a part of the integral system. It's not just that you test the delivery from the new generating units. You actually test the entire system with the new facilities installed.
That's right. So it is your testimony then that these transmission lines, when they were planned to be built, the purpose for which they were built was not just Units 2 and 3, but also other purposes, correct?
Well, they would have been integrated into the system and would have served other purposes. So just by the very nature, yes, they would have been included as part of the plan for everything that the DESC system had to provide over the 10-year period, of the 10-year study period anyway.
That's right. And to reiterate, on page 24, you actually say they were also planned to be an integral part of the DESC transmission system, correct?
Right. That's correct.
And Mr. Whiteley, have you reviewed the application, testimony, and orders from the siting proceedings that authorize the construction of these transmission lines?
I reviewed the testimony of Clay Young in the siting proceeding.
Okay. Mr. Whiteley, I am going to attempt to share my screen with a couple of different exhibits that were sent to Ms. Wheat on Monday. And I think we're going to have those emailed out in just 1 second, and I'll attempt to share my screen in as efficient way as possible, but I don't pretend to be the most technical savvy person, so bear with me just 1 second, please.
No problem.
Michelle, where is ORS Exhibit C? ORS Exhibit C. I think Pam mentioned she put it here. You know what, Mr. Whiteley? If Mr. Ziegler has it in front of him and the commissioners have it in front of them, and you can have it in front of you, maybe we can proceed without sharing just to avoid any unnecessary delay. Is that acceptable, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ziegler?
I believe I have it, so I can't really say. When was it sent?
I think just a second ago, so it may be another second yet before you receive it.
All right. It hasn't gotten through yet. It should get through in a while.
Attorney Bateman, the document is cut off to the point where our court reporter can't identify it. Would you please
Okay.
identify the document or describe it in a way where we can make sure she's passing out the right document?
Yes, sir, I can. There are two documents. The first would be up at the top labeled, don't worry about it, Michelle. Up at the top labeled ORS Cross Exhibit C. And beneath that, without knowing which portion is cut off, beneath that, this is the application that the company filed for citing in docket number 2011-325-E. Are you able to see that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Ziegler, have you received that yet?
It has not gotten through yet. It sometimes takes a while. Our law firm has very, very tight cybersecurity, given some of the clients we work with, and so
Yeah.
it is,
And Ms.
takes a
McMullen
while
has stepped
to push
in,
those matters.
so she may be able to help me share. Sorry. Right there. Thank you so much, ma'am. Oh. So, I'm gonna try to do it. I appreciate y'all bearing with me.
The document has gotten through. I'm looking at it. Give me a second
Okay.
to familiarize myself with it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pam. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Whiteley, Mr. Ziegler, I believe we have shared ORS Cross Exhibit C on the screen. Do y'all see that?
Could you blow that up for us, please, Attorney Bateman?
Yes, sir, I certainly can. Is that good enough, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Whiteley, on this first page, I'll scroll down a bit. It says submitted by, I'm sorry?
Sorry.
Okay.
I just thought I was on mute.
Okay. Mr. Whiteley, on this first page, it says submitted by Matthew Gissendanner. Do you see that?
I do.
And, excuse me, while this is the application filed, this is printed straight off of the Commission's docket management system. It does have the docket number listed in the upper right-hand corner. It says docket number 2011-325-E. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. Mr. Whiteley, I'm now going to scroll down a couple of pages. This is the application that the company filed for siting of these transmission lines. Paragraph 3 here on page 4 is the need and necessity paragraph. Mr. Whiteley, I've highlighted a paragraph there. If you don't mind, please reading that.
Sure. SCE&G has determined that 4 new 230 kV circuits originating at the VC Summer Nuclear Station will be required to connect the generated capacity of VCSNS units 2 and 3 to its electric transmission grid. These lines include the VCS1 Killian 230 kV line and the VCS2 Lake Murray 230 kV line number 2, which will need to be in service prior to VCSNS Unit 2 coming online, and the VCS2 St. George 230 kV lines 1 and 2, which will need to be in service prior to VCSNS Unit 3 coming online.
Thank you, Mr. Whiteley. Mr. Whiteley, does this paragraph list as a consideration of building these transmission lines the connection to the generated capacity of VC Summer Nuclear Units 2 and 3?
It references that nuclear capacity, yes.
Is that the only consideration that you see listed?
Well, it's a description of the 4 230 kV lines, and that's the only generation that's listed.
Yes, and in fact, it says that the 4 new lines will be required to connect the generated capacity of units 2 and 3 to the transmission grid, does it not?
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that this be marked for identification and entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
ORS Cross Exhibit C will be marked and entered into the record as hearing exhibit 26.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whiteley, I'm now going to try to do something. I'm going to try to pull this off the screen and put one more document up on the screen. I apologize if you'll bear with me for just 1 second. Thank you so much, Pam. Thank you to Pam McMullen, our IT wizard. Mr. Whiteley, Mr. Ziegler, Mr. Chairman, are you able to see the document that's placed up on the screen?
I am.
And Mr. Ziegler, we had emailed, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I can see it. I would like to have a copy that I can scroll through and look at on my email, which I believe is...
Certainly. We have emailed it, and it should be arriving any second now if it's not already.
This is Exhibit D. I have Exhibit C twice, but I don't have D yet, so it should be coming in a second.
Certainly. Mr. Ziegler, would you like me to wait until you receive D?
It would be nice. I would like to be able to look through, as I think it is my right, to look through a document that my witness is going to be examined on before he's examined on it. And since I don't have anything but what you show on the screen, I can't do that yet.
Mr. Chairman, as soon as Mr. Ziegler receives Exhibit D, we will begin. Mr. Ziegler, to the extent it's helpful, this is the siting application which was filed by the company 1 year subsequent to the siting application filed in docket 2011-325-E.
Mute there. It has arrived, so let me just give it a quick look.
Okay. Okay.
All right, very good.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, are you able to read the document on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Whiteley, I've got much the same questions. Do you see that this document was submitted by Matthew W. Gissendanner?
Yes, I do.
And while this is the application, it was printed straight off of the Commission's docket management website. It does not have the docket number filled in the upper right-hand corner, but subject to check, would you accept that this is the application filed in docket number 2012-225-E?
Well, this is the first time I'm seeing this document, but yeah, subject to check, I would accept that.
Subject to check, sure, I understand. Mr. Whiteley, I'm going to scroll down. And much the same as the previous application, we have the need and necessity paragraph. And Mr. Whiteley, I'll ask you to read this highlighted section, if you will.
Sure. SCE&G has determined that 4 new 230 kV circuits originating at the VC Summer Nuclear Station will be required to connect the generated capacity of VCSNS units 2 and 3 to its electric transmission grid. These lines include the VCS1 Killian 230 kV line and the VCS2 Lake Murray 230 kV line number 2, which will need to be in service prior to VCSNS Unit 2 coming online, and the VCS2 St. George 230 kV lines number 1 and number 2, which will need to be in service prior to VCSNS Unit number 3 coming online. There we go. Thank you for scrolling down. In its prior application in docket number 2011-325E, SCE&G sought and received a certificate for the VCS1 Killian 230 kV line, the VCS2 Lake Murray 230 kV line number 2, and the segment of VCS2 St. George 230 kV line number 1, which will run from VCSNS switchyard number 2 to the Lake Murray 230 115 kV substation. This application seeks a certificate for the remaining portion of the VCS2 St. George 230 kV line number 1 and for the entire VCS2 St. George 230 kV line number 2 and associated facilities, which include the, and if you could scroll more, thank you, planned St. George 230 kV switching station and the planned Saluda River 230 115 kV substation. VCS2 St. George line number 2 will fold in to the Saluda River 230 115 kV substation, and both lines will terminate at the St. George 230 kV switching station.
Thank you, Mr. Whiteley. And out of the need and necessity excerpt that you just read from, is there any consideration for the construction of these transmission lines other than the generation coming from VC Summer Units 2 and 3?
The only thing that's referenced in the paragraph is the description of the lines, which I've read, and the 2 nuclear units.
That's correct. And Mr. Whiteley, not to state the obvious, but was VC Summer Units 2 and 3 was the construction ever completed?
No, my understanding they were canceled.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that this application be marked for identification and entered into the record as hearing exhibit number 27.
ORS cross-examination exhibit D will be marked and entered into the record as hearing exhibit 27.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Whiteley. ORS has nothing further for this witness.
Commissioner questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is Commissioner Thomas.
Commissioner Thomas, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Whitley. Appreciate you taking my question.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Thank you. If I understood you correctly, you said the average cost was $1.3 million per mile.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the average cost of the facilities that were built is $1.4 million per mile, approximately. And comparable lines in the North America, the eastern portion of North America, would be $1.8 million per mile.
Okay, very good. I'll go with the $1.4 million. So can you identify even one single mile that is not needed today or that is overbuilt for today's needs?
No, I cannot. The entire project, as planned, is part of the integrated system, and based on the studies that I've seen, all of the transmission that's in service today is required to avoid violation of planning standards.
Thank you. No further questions.
Chair Williams.
Commissioner Caston.
Good afternoon, Mr. Whiteley.
Good afternoon.
You've mentioned the planning studies many times. I've kind of mentioned them a time or two today, or mentioned planning. Page 5, line 11 and 12 of your rebuttal testimony. I think that's what this is. Direct testimony, I'm sorry. The planning studies performed meet or exceed industry standards in the way that were conducted, in the way they were conducted, and they provided results that are similar, and so on. What met or exceeded the industry standards? The planning studies or the design? I mean, I'm not real sure what that means. The planning studies meet or exceed the industry standards?
Yes, let me see if I can explain that a little bit further, Commissioner. There are several NERC standards that describe how the computer models, the system models that planners use to analyze the system, how those models are to be developed, and the way the data that goes into those models are collected. And then it also specifies a number of tests that need to be done for an adequate system. And so when I say that the studies meet those standards, that's the actual study work itself meets those standards, meaning the models that they used met the industry standards. The way they conducted the study meant that they covered all of the standards and the required tests, and did so, the reason I say or exceed, because not only were they looking at just a single year, they were looking at a 10-year period. In fact, multiple cases or situations within the 10-year planning horizon, both for summer peak conditions, winter peak conditions, the lighter, so-called light load or shoulder peak conditions. There were a number of cases that they did a very thorough analysis, and that's why I say it actually exceeds the standards, because the standards only require peak analysis, and typically many companies only do either a summer or a winter peak for a few years, a few selected years in the 10-year planning horizon. And I think DESC's planning staff did a very thorough job, and so I think they were actually exceeding the standard sort of level of performing transmission planning studies.
So, I'm learning something. So, am I hearing that for transmission lines, main lines, that the standard or the typical electric utility planning period is 10 years?
Yes, that's pretty typical across the United States. The furthest, if you want to think of it as the furthest out into the future, most, if not all, of the planning computer models go is 10 years into the future. I referenced in my testimony the U.S. Department of Energy study where I was the project manager. Part of the specification from the U.S. Department of Energy was that we look 20 years into the future. And I have to say that it was a stretch to get the data to go that far into the future for the transmission system. We had good computer models and good study models for I call it the 10-year period, the first 10 years, but looking that additional 10 years to go 20 years into the future, there's just so many uncertainties, load growth patterns, generation patterns, any of the variables that go into the planning process, that it makes it very difficult to look that far into the future. So most systems are limited to the 10-year planning horizon.
I'm really shocked by that, if you want to know the truth. Water, wastewater utilities look that far in the future. Matter of fact, for water supply, we look 50 to 100 years in the future. And yeah, nobody knows what's going to happen 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, but they've been doing it a long time. And typically, $1.4 million per mile, somehow 10-year planning horizon just seems grossly short to me, but that's me. And it seems if water and wastewater utilities and others can plan that far out, and they have to do the same thing, look at projections, look at demands, look at growth, and where that's coming, the electric's coming too. I mean, they go hand in hand. I'm just surprised the electric industry can't do the same, or doesn't do the same. But that's just my opinion. On page 4, line 19, you said you review the studies on which Mr. Young's and Mr. Richards' testimony was based to become familiar with the techniques and goals used in their planning process and analysis. What techniques and goals did you become familiar with?
First off, it would be the way they went about analyzing the computer models. And again, you get back to tests that are prescribed by the planning standards. These are the so-called N-1, N-1, -1, N-2. So it's the multiple contingency testing that you do to the system. And so part of what I reviewed and learned was the way that DESC's planning staff actually applied those levels of contingencies in the analysis, and learned that the way they compile the answers, they perform the studies with those multiple contingency situations, and sort of that's different, the way that they analyze things that were different from the way I used to analyze them when I did the same work at Ameren Corporation. And again, that's why I concluded that their work meets the standards. It's a good utility practice. They checked all the boxes, did everything that I would have expected them to do, and in fact, a little more because of the depth of contingency analysis that they do. Part of the explanation is because of the geography of the South Carolina system. It's subject to hurricanes. It's subject to other storms that other utilities don't face. And so, part of my learning process about the way they conduct their work was about the sort of the details of the planning that they did, and then how they interpret the results and what they use the results for.
So as part of that, to continue, I guess going to lines 3 and 4 on page 5, to understand the specific results of those analyses and collect additional information on the current and future use of the transmission upgrade facilities. So that additional information you collected on current and future.
Yes, let me.
Well, you weren't, I know I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but I'm still thinking, was that current and future, was that just these different little plans you saw? Was it one big map with this big plan that showed these future things and this is a part of it? And apparently, if I'm understanding it correctly, the best you can hope for is a 10-year master plan anyway. Is that what I'm hearing?
Essentially, I think the answer there is yes. You have to remember that the system is always analyzed as one great big entity. So even though you might be focusing on a particular area of the system, and it might be the data on the transmission loading of a single line or a small group of lines. Behind that is the analysis of the entire system. So there really is the big picture that I think you're looking for, but usually you don't look at the big picture. You don't look hundreds of miles away. You're focused on a particular area where you have a concern or a problem that you're trying to solve. And so you focus in on that area, but behind it is the bigger picture. But again, 10 years, in my experience, is just about as far out as most systems go. I've seen some limited analysis at 15 years, but nothing in the 20-year or beyond time frame that you've described. And I think in part, the planners are confident that they can come up with solutions to fix any problems that they see in the future. If they uncover a problem that's coming up in year 10 or 9, they have adequate lead time to fix it before it becomes a real operating problem, as they say, where the rubber meets the road in real operations.
Well, so are you telling me, yes, you did see a master plan as part of this information on current and future transmission, or you're saying, well, this portion of plan certainly could be part of that?
Well, the portion I was focused on were these new transmission facilities that are part of the upgrade projects. I didn't look at all of the changes across the entire DESC system that were made from year 1, today's time frame, all the way to 10 years in the future. I didn't look at the entire plan, but I'm confident that plan was built into the system models that were analyzing these facilities that I was actually focusing on.
So the additional information on current and future, you just looked at limited future, limited current.
Yeah, part of what I was saying with the current, that had to do more with the current loading or current flows on the upgrade facilities, and the analysis that shows that the flows on the facilities today is very reasonable. It's about what other transmission lines in the Southeast carry at time of peak. So that's what I meant by the current. And the future is more the analysis or the projection of what the loads will be in the future under contingency situations, and will the system be adequate either with or without the upgrade facilities in place.
So what is the typical, from start to finish, planning, design, permits, approvals, construction of a significant, say 230 kV, whatever, transmission line? I know if it's 1 mile, it would take less than 10 miles, but let's say one of these. What's the typical start to finish time period?
There's really a whole lot of variables, but just to pull one number, I would say roughly 5 years. I'd probably want to put a range around that, 5 to 7 years, depending on the length of the facility. As you said, the shorter ones are generally easier than the longer ones. I personally led the planning, the engineering, design, and construction of a transmission line in the St. Louis metropolitan area that was 13 miles long, and it took 13 years to complete. I think that's an anomaly on the high side, simply because of the very congested metropolitan area that the transmission line was traversing. But I'd say generally 5 to 7 years is a reasonable time frame to expect for a major transmission facility.
All right, so 5 to 7 years of a 10-year planning period. Is that correct?
Yes, it could be you've identified the problem in year 10, and it may take you 7 years to build the solution.
What if you get to year 8 and find out, uh-oh?
Well, that's always the thing that planners are most afraid of, and that's why they always look at multiple situations, multiple contingencies, multiple configurations, and pick the one that addresses all of the needs and provides as much flexibility as they can for the future, because they know things are going to change.
Well, again, I guess I'll end it here, but it's not clear to me at all. It's why other utilities, water, wastewater come to mind because I'm more familiar with them, can plan longer horizons, because it matters. Once you put stuff in the ground or spend that kind of money, you don't want to figure wrong. So I'm struggling to understand why those utilities can, but the electric industry seems to just be on this 10-year plan because nobody knows what's going to happen on year 11. Anyway, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner, questions?
Mr. Chairman. Go ahead, Ms. Williams.
Commissioner Williams, then Commissioner Powers.
Great, thank you. Mr. Whiteley, thank you so much for the education and the background that you're sharing with us. My question has to do with the transmission upgrade projects and kind of ask a what-if question. Let's just pretend that there had never been a VC summer planned. How different would the transmission, in your opinion, how different would the transmission have been planned for our system had we never had VC summer?
Well, as you know, hypotheticals are always difficult because there's so many variables. But just the short answer to your question, I think, is not a whole lot.
Okay.
You know, there would have been, there was or is still the need for significant north-south reinforcement, a north-south backbone. So there would be some form of 230 kV being the appropriate voltage level transmission from the north to the south. Maybe the particular routing into the VC summer site wouldn't, of course, had to be done. There's obviously details, but I think it would be not a whole lot different than what is there today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. No more
You're
questions.
welcome.
Commissioner Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I go back to the multiple configurations and flexibility you talk about. It doesn't sound like there was much flexibility or multiple configurations as far as the nuclear plant and that falling through. And now the ratepayers are having to pay for it. Would there be a better system, or would you have placed it somewhere else without the nuclear plant?
Yeah, I mean, if you, again, hypothetically go back and say, well, we never planned on the nuclear units, but we know we had this system requirement to reinforce the north-south corridor, it's likely you'd come up with something different. But again, I don't think it would be a whole lot different in terms of capacity and the reinforcement need, simply because as Mr. Parker described, the generation resources that you have today and the situation with power flows today requires that additional reinforcement. But of course, it would probably be a little different, but I don't think it would be fundamentally a lot different.
So you see the flexibility in what's there?
I do. The capacity of the lines is appropriately sized so that there's flexibility. The fact that there were 4 lines built in sort of 2 different directions, if you will, adds to that flexibility and reinforces the capability of the system and provides that reliability and resiliency that the system really requires.
Right. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Any other commissioner questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Irvin.
Thank you, sir. Are you aware of the fact that this was a joint project between Santee Cooper and SC DN?
Yes, I understood both the nuclear units themselves and not the facilities, the transmission facilities in question here, but there were other transmission facilities that Santee Cooper was going to construct as part of the overall build, if you will, for the nuclear units, that there was a combined planning effort and sort of split ownership, yes.
Given that fact, don't you think that the commission should consider some kind of equitable discount or distribution of the cost? It wouldn't be fair for Dominion ratepayers to bear the whole cost of these transmission lines, would it?
Well, again, what I can tell you is that the transmission lines that are there are in use today. They're critical to meet the reliability needs, and really, I think wouldn't be a whole lot different if the nuclear plant had never been planned. So all I can do is give you my assessment of the system and the fact that the lines really are needed for reliability purposes.
I understand. But at the time they were planned and constructed, they were designed to serve both Santee Cooper and Dominion customers, true?
Well, they would have been designed, yeah, essentially, yes. They would have been designed and configured for the system as a whole. Again, when you do the planning work, it's never just in one local area. You put the proposed facilities into a model that includes a large portion of the eastern part of the United States, and so it becomes an integral part of that. So yes, it's both, would be serving both needs, but also any other needs of the overall system.
Were you around when we heard the testimony about the prior commission orders concerning the Baseload Review Act? Did you hear that testimony?
I believe that was Mr. Parker's testimony, if I'm not mistaken, and yes, I was listening in the live stream.
And so my question is that since the justification for these lines was based upon the Baseload Review Act and authorized by the commission under that act, does that fact determine how the cost should be considered in terms of allocation?
Well, Commissioner, I have to say I'm not familiar with the genesis of the Baseload Act or South Carolina law as it applies to that. I'm certainly not an attorney, and all I can say is that the review of the work that was done to plan the new facilities as part of the overall system and the way that they're actually used today, even though the nuclear units were never completed, demonstrates that they are still a critical part of the system and are needed to provide reliable service to customers.
Well, let's assume, and that I agree with you, that they're needed now. It's obvious that they are needed now, but was there a point in time where perhaps as soon as the plant was under construction and then failed and was abandoned, would there have been a period of time where they really weren't needed for Dominion customers?
Well, I think the analysis that as was done goes back to 2018 and showed that even in 2018 there was a deficiency on the system. I guess if you go far enough back in time before the lines had even started construction, you might say, well, gee, we should stop construction. But my understanding of the timeline is that the lines were essentially complete or very close to being completed by the time the nuclear units were canceled, and very close to the year 2018 when the studies show that significant transmission reinforcement would have been required otherwise.
One of my colleagues, whom I respect a great deal, Commissioner Caston, has been troubled by the lack of long-term planning. And so I'm going to ask you, we're involved in an integrated resource plan now with Dominion, and although that's a separate docket, do you typically see in integrated resource planning a component that would address the long-term needs for more capacity of transmission lines? Is that would that be a part of the integrated resource planning process?
Well, Commissioner, let me first say I'm not an expert on integrated resource planning. I'm familiar with it and been involved in the utility industry as long as I have. What I can say from my experience is that the integrated resource planning is about, capacity and energy needs and resources to supply those needs. Transmission development is typically a next step or a secondary consideration in the IRP process. But I'm not an IRP expert.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Chair Williams, could I ask one more question?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Caston.
Sorry to come back to you, Mr. Whiteley, but thinking back to actually Mr. Parker's testimony and looking at the map, the transmission lines we're talking about, and I think he showed on his figure B, page 12. If VC Summer weren't there, there was nothing there, no plant. I'm assuming it's like any treatment plant. You need the main transmission lines from that plant to transmit the load, the flow, whatever, out to the distribution system and to homes, businesses. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. You have to recall, though, that transmission lines in a network configuration such as this, the power may not just flow uniformly in one direction all the time because of the shifts of generation and load patterns on the system. The pattern of the power flowing on those lines can be more in one direction and less in another, and then shift depending on other changes on the system. It's not always uniformly in the same direction.
Absolutely. Same with water, as a matter of fact, at times. So if VC Summer weren't there, would those same lines be constructed the same size and everything else?
Well, again, as I've described, it's a little hard to go back in a hypothetical and say exactly how a different system would be designed with a different set of generators. But I think based on the need for, again, the significant reinforcement across the backbone north to south, you'd have some configuration of transmission very similar to this one, and the same kinds of capacity, the same, as I call them, building block capacity, would be required to add the strength that's needed. Probably wouldn't have exactly the same routing, the exact configuration, but of an order of magnitude, it wouldn't be a whole lot different.
Am I correct then in the assumption that if you have a generating plant, wherever that is located, then the significant transmission lines would at least generate from that point, radiate out from that generation point? Is that correct?
Yeah, generally that's correct. The power would flow out of the generating facility. If it's what we call a radial connection into the network, meaning there's just a single transmission line from a generator some distance away to a substation, then clearly the power only flows the one direction out of the generating plant. In the case of these facilities, they're actually networked, meaning they connect to multiple places on the system, and so the power flows in different directions depending on the conditions on the system. With as much generation as would have been at VC Summer with the 2 nuclear units completed, generally the power would have been out from the power plant. That's correct.
Thank you so much, Mr. Whiteley.
You're welcome.
Commissioner questions?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Thomas.
Commissioner Thomas, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Whiteley, I hate to bug you again, but you made me think about something. So I've heard you say a couple of times now that without VC Sumner, the system would not be a whole lot different. You've used that term, not be a whole lot different, a couple of times, I believe. So I guess my question is, would you agree that at $1.4 million per mile, not a whole lot different, and start to add up to some money? Is that correct?
Potentially it could. Again, in the hypothetical, turn back the clock to the early 2000s and assume that the nuclear generation was never planned, never envisioned, you would have a different planning process, a different environment in which you're developing a future transmission system. My point about it not being a whole lot different is there's still the system need for the north-south reinforcement. And if you just look at the miles, it's going to be a similar number of miles of transmission. You are correct. When it's over $1 million a mile, a few miles does make a difference. But it's really impossible to say what that difference is because you're going back in time sort of with a hypothetical that really doesn't exist today.
Well, I guess I would question your definition of hypothetical. I mean, clearly what happened did happen. And we're asking questions about what happened and how that fits into the system today. That's not a hypothetical question, in my opinion. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I agree.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Any more commissioner questions? Redirect.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whiteley, let me begin by asking a few questions about the issue of Santee Cooper and its responsibility for building transmission related to the nuclear project. Were you present when Mr. Parker spoke to the allocation of capacity out of the nuclear plant between Santee Cooper and Dominion Energy, South Carolina, then SCE&G?
Yes, I was listening to his testimony, and he described a 55-45 split, I believe.
And would you be able to confirm that Santee Cooper was responsible for its power and SCE&G was responsible for its power in terms of its transmission planning?
That would generally be the case, yes.
All right, sir. So was anything in your testimony meant to indicate that SCENG or Dominion Energy planned or expended money to deliver power to Santee Cooper that was Santee Cooper's generation?
Absolutely not. My review is limited to the transmission upgrade facilities that are DESC's facilities.
Let me ask you a few questions about the sequence of planning and how the pieces fit together, which will, I think, culminate in us discussing some specifics about questions that Mr. Bateman asked. The first step in siting transmission for a generation facility is what?
If you have a generation facility and you're planning transmission for that particular unit, you have to look at the load patterns on the system, where the generation is located geographically on the system, and then figure out ways to move that power into the system while at the same time providing strength to the system so that you're not overloading part of the system simply because of the new generation.
And my question wasn't clear, I apologize. The first step is an interconnection agreement, correct? Or an interconnection study?
If the three steps is the feasibility study of whether or not it's feasible to interconnect a generating plant, and then you end up with a study that takes it the next step, which is the actual impact study, how the generation would impact it, and then finally a system reinforcement study, if you will, as to what's required. So it's sort of a three-step process today.
And so at the end, you have a list of the actual facilities that need to be built on the system to reinforce it for that.
That's correct.
Piece of work. That's the system reinforcement study. And just to put this into the bigger context, every year NERC and FERC require a transmission assessment to be run. Is that correct?
That is correct. The planning standards require annual assessments, and the FERC requires submission of data on an annual basis for those studies.
So the annual assessment updates the 10-year plan every year. Is that correct?
That's correct. I would take it maybe one step further, that each of the years in the planning horizon, the 10-year planning horizon, is typically investigated. You don't just investigate year one and the 10-year out. You look at multiple spots along that 10-year planning horizon to make sure there haven't been any changes in the interim.
All right. And if there is a requirement to reinforce the system as a part of the annual assessment, that requirement is identified and then included in the planning going forward as if it were built on schedule and as anticipated, correct?
Mr. Chairman, this is Andrew Bateman with ORS. I certainly understand the need for efficiencies and to move as expeditiously as possible, but this is Mr. Ziegler's witness, and this is redirect. I'd ask that he not be allowed to lead the witness in the way in which he's doing.
Sustained.
Chairman, I believe that. And so
you can put your response on the record, Attorney Ziegler. I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah, my response is that I understand that the issue of leading witnesses has been greatly changed, and that one can, as long as it's not putting words in the witness's mouth, that one can suggest which way the witness needs to go. But I'm happy to slow the process down if that's what needs to happen. So would you state again for me what happens if you identify a need that is required in a annual transmission assessment? How is that reflected in future assessments?
So if in a particular assessment, whether it's again in year one of the 10-year horizon or any of the intervening years up to year 10, you're actually required to develop a solution to the problem that's found. And let's just take, for example, a problem is found in year 3 of the 10-year planning horizon. So that's 3 years in the future. And whatever that particular problem is, you develop a solution, a planning solution that resolves that. You then insert that solution into year 3 because you're required to do that. But that solution doesn't just disappear in year 4 through 10. That solution stays in all of the future planning models. So all of the future years are built on the solutions that are inserted into the whatever time frame in the planning horizon. So if you had to include transmission line, for example, in year 1 of the 10-year horizon, you would continue to plan for years 2 through 10 into the future, assuming that that transmission line is actually there and it's connected and it's in service serving customers. So it becomes an integral part of the overall plan.
And would the same be true for anything identified in an interconnection study? Once the interconnection study had gone through its 3 phases, how would that be treated in your future assessments?
No, it would be treated no differently. Any new transmission facility that connects to, reinforces, changes, enhances, or modifies the transmission system, when it's identified to be installed in a particular year, it stays in the models until the utility knows that it needs to be removed. It becomes the basis for all future planning.
All right. And those models would be the same models used for the annual assessments and for future interconnection studies. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that is correct. There's one database, if you will, or set of models that are created by the industry in the eastern part of the United States. And those models form the basis for everyone's studies so that all utility systems start from a common point and that all systems know what their neighboring systems are planning in the future.
And so when former SC&G DESC proposed VC Summer nuclear facility units 2 and 3, what sort of interconnection studies would have been required?
Well, they would have started with the same interconnection studies for other generators and start with the feasibility study and then how to interconnect it and then a system impact study. And all of the changes to the system that are required from the impact study would have been included into the comprehensive plan. And I think that's what you see, not just 4 230 kV lines, but there are other changes that were made to the system at the 115 kV level, circuit breaker changes. I'm sure there were protective relay changes or a bunch of things done in association with that. And that became one comprehensive package, if you will, of upgrades required for the new generation.
And Mr. Bateman asked you questions about the application in docket 2011-325E. Do you recall that part of your prior testimony?
Yes, he asked me to read from the document.
All right, sir. And were you present when I redirected Mr. Parker concerning the study that was included in Mr. Young's testimony in that docket?
Yes, I was listening.
And how would that study relate to the interconnection studies that we've been talking about here?
Well, the study and it became effectively part of the study for the new transmission facilities.
All right, sir. And you were present when Mr. Parker showed that that study was submitted to the Commission as part of docket 2011-325E, were you not?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Did you understand that study to discuss anything about the need for generation to be delivered from the northern part of the system, the Columbia area, into the Charleston area?
Yes, Mr. Parker, I think, explained the situation well in that there are generation changes on the system that are requiring power to flow from the northern part of the system to the southern part of the system. for a number of reasons, generation retirements, availability of natural gas, and he cited a number of things, but I do recall him talking specifically about the need for power flow from the northern region to the southern region.
And you've reviewed those studies, have you not?
I have, and the results from the analysis that he was drawing from and the contingency work that shows that there's a need for the facilities that are already in place.
And you would agree or disagree with the conclusion in that study that correcting the imbalance between the load centers north and south was a key consideration for the transmission planning in that time period?
I probably wouldn't say correcting, I would say accommodating. The load develops where it develops on the system, and customers demand electricity where they demand it. And so the transmission system has to be developed to accommodate that. And so, yes, it would have had, the transmission system would have to be developed to accommodate that difference and the differing location of the generation resources that are supplying those customers.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask the Commission to take judicial notice of the testimony that Mr. Young also provided in the attachments in the second docket that Mr. Bateman referenced, which is 2012-225E. It's very much the same as what was included in the 2011 docket, but I think for completeness, I would like that to be in the record if there's no objection. Again, it's taking notice of documents in the files of the Commission.
Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, Mr. Ziegler is proposing that the entire document, that the Commission take judicial notice of the entire document?
Yes, Mr. Young's testimony and attachments from that document.
Notice taken.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, this is Scott Elliott. I have no objections to the Commission taking judicial notice of Mr. Young's complete testimony and all his exhibits to his testimony in docket number 2012-220E, but I would note that Mr. Ziegler did not introduce Mr. Young's complete testimony and exhibits in docket number 2011-325E, and I would ask the Commission to take judicial notice of Mr. Young's complete testimony and his exhibits, all his exhibits, in docket number 2011-325E, please.
Notice taken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me ask you to review with me for a second the document which is already in evidence as part of the rebuttal testimony provided by Mr. Parker, and it is this system map. Is that appearing on your screen now, sir?
Yes, sir, it is.
And this map shows the generation location, location of generation in the DESC service territory today. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it does not include any generation related to VC Summer Units 2 and 3, which have been canceled. Is that correct?
No, it does not.
And I think if we begin there where my pointer is, if you can see it, and go counterclockwise, these are the facilities that are located at the Jenkinsville site today, are they not?
They look like they're all pointed in that direction, yes.
And would you please read them off going counterclockwise from Fairfield to Parr?
Attorney Ziegler, could you please blow up that map?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was struggling to be able to read it on my computer.
Is that, I'll tell you what I can do, since I'm not going below the midpoint, I can blow it up even higher. Or I can completely jump ship on it. Where is it? I think I've gone up too much. There we are. Okay.
So the first one you pointed out was Fairfield. It's 576 megawatts. Neal Shoals Hydro is 3 megawatts.
Mr. Whiteley?
Summer. Yes.
I'm sorry, this is Andrew with ORS. I don't mean to interrupt. Mr. Chairman, I'm unsure to what cross or commissioner questions this redirect relates. And I would simply request that Mr. Ziegler help me understand.
Yes, the question is, there were questions about terminating these lines at the current Jenkinsville site. And the point that is being made is that over nearly 1,200 megawatts of capacity owned by by DESC is located at that site, and it is the largest single generation location on the DESC system today. Reinforcing the logic of connecting that generation to the rest of the grid.
Mr. Chairman, I would object that I believe this redirect really does fall outside the scope of the, frankly, narrowly tailored cross.
Sustained.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Attorney Ziegler, please move on.
I will move on. Were you present, Mr. Whiteley, when Mr. Kassam discussed the approach for building the lines that are in question here?
Yes, that occurred the other day, and I was listening to Mr. Kassam's testimony.
What is your professional opinion of that approach to building lines and the way that was handled?
I think, as I may have mentioned earlier, that the comprehensive approach of building all of the transmission upgrade facilities, and I'm not just talking about the 4 230 kV lines, but the other facilities that were associated with the overall project, and approaching it as one comprehensive plan makes sense. It clearly saves some money and is one of the contributing factors, I believe, to why the cost for the transmission.
Mr. Whiteley, I'm sorry. I certainly don't intend to be rude, but Mr. Chairman, I'd raise the same objection as raised a second ago, that I believe Mr. Whiteley's opinions on Mr. Kassam's testimony from yesterday fall well outside both my cross as well as commissioner questions.
Mr. Chairman, I disagree. We had a number of questions about whether costs could have been saved by doing a different approach. We had a number of questions about whether a link in the transmission chain could be taken out without destroying its value. I think this is highly relevant to the questions that the Commission was asking here. It's important the Commission understand that this was project, because of the integrated fashion in which it was conceived and delivered, created great value for customers. And to second guess that approach now would be unfair to the company and contrary to just and reasonable rate making.
Mr. Chairman, again, this was testified to by Mr. Kassam yesterday. I don't believe Mr. Whiteley's this redirect examination is allowed based upon the cross questions or the questions from the commissioners, Mr. Chairman.
Sustained. Attorney Ziegler, please move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break until 6 p.m. when the public hearing starts. See you then.
Mr. Chairman, may Mr. Whiteley be excused?
Yes, Mr. Whiteley, you may step down from the witness stand and be excused.
Thank you,
Chairman
Mr. Chairman.
Williams?
Yes. Who's speaking?
Mr. Chairman, this is Scott Elliott. Will we resume the hearing in the morning at 9 a.m.?
No, I'm sorry. I was going to announce that at the end of the night, the hearing this evening. The plan is to start at 10 a.m. in the morning.
Very fine. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Was there someone else? I guess not.
That covered it. Thank you.